My name is Daniel Yolkut. I'm the Rabbi of Congregation Perek in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Our learning today should be Ilu Nishmas Sarufka Bas Marina Rav Nachum Minzel. Our topic for today is Mizmor Tzadi Beis, the 92nd Psalm, the Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos, the song for the Sabbath day, which perhaps is one of the most recited chapters of Tehillim, in that it features 3 times in our weekly Shabbos liturgy, once in Kabbalah Shabbos, once in Psukei de Zimra, and finally as the Shir Shel Yom, as the song for the day for Shabbos. And it certainly is unique in the book of Tehillim, in that there is no other chapter that is explicitly designated as having been written for a specific occasion, even though, again, we have the notion of the Shir Shel Yom, both on a daily basis, as well as for different moadim, for different occasions on the calendar. No other day is indicated as such in the text of the book of Tehillim. Seeing the title Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos would make us think that this is a psalm whose content would be very similar to many of the other compositions over the millennia for Shabbos, something like the Zmiros or the Chadodi, that would deal with motifs of creation, of rest, perhaps of the liberation from the slavery in Egypt, or with the halachos of Shabbos, with the notions of the joy of Shabbos, of the rest of Shabbos. But nothing like that appears in this psalm. In fact, after the initial reference to Shabbos and an introduction that talks about the idea of praising God and praising Him with different musical instruments, most of the psalm really deals with the issue of theodicy, of tzaddik v'ralo, of the problem of evil, and of living in a world where the evidence of our eyes does not teach us of the triumph of good. The Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos says that in the end we will see the righteous vindicated and God and good on the winning side. So the question is, why is this psalm, L'Yom HaShabbos, designated for Shabbos? So one possibility is found in the Mishnah in the end of Maseches Tamid, which deals with the first list of the Shirei Hayom, of the different psalms for the day. The Mishnah, after quoting the first line of the psalm, Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos, then interposes Mizmor Shir L'Asid Lavo, that this is a psalm for the future, for the day which is completely Shabbos. And this again is drawing on the old motif of Shabbos as being a foreshadowing of Olam Haba, as of the world to come. And the notion would seem to be that the world to come is the place where all of human history will suddenly be understood, and where the vindication of God and of goodness will finally and ultimately come. It's interesting to note that Rav Moshe Soloveitchik saw this interpolation as actually a reflection of the way that the psalm was sung. In other words, that this was not just an interpretation, but the Leviim themselves added this phrase as part of the recitation of the psalm in the Beis HaMikdash. And in fact, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik is said to have done this himself when saying the Shir Shel Yom. He added that phrase, which would seem to provide the link between the reference to Shabbos and the psalm itself. What I'd like to share with you, though, is a beautiful and creative interpretation of this phrase by Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, achieved by weaving together a number of different midrashic strands. The Medrash Shmos Rabbah suggests that Shabbos was observed by our ancestors in Egypt as a day of strengthening faith. That they had a collection of different scrolls passed to them from the time of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, that they would study and absorb every Shabbos as a way of strengthening themselves against the horrors that they experienced week in and week out in Egypt. Rabbi Yaakov suggests that the central theme, the spiritual crisis for the Jews in Egypt, was the problem of theodicy. In other words, that they were faced on a constant basis with the idea that the wicked Egyptians clearly seemed to be successful, and that they were persecuted and tortured, and the idea of the triumph of good, even if promised to them in the covenant made with between God and Abraham, that the triumph of good seemed something very, very far removed from their experience. And that this, when they gathered on Shabbos, struggling with that notion, that perennial problem of evil and of tragedy, was really the issue that they had to deal with. Rabbi Yaakov points out that Rashi and Bava Basra credits Moshe Rabbeinu with the authorship of a series of psalms, which would include the Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos. His suggestion is that Moshe Rabbeinu composed Mizmor Shir Liyam HaShabbos not as a psalm about the Sabbath day, but a psalm for the Sabbath day. In other words, when the Jews gathered in Egypt on Shabbos, they would recite this psalm as a meditation on the problem of evil, being that that's what was most meaningful and terrible in their own existence. That's what they needed to struggle with, and that is what Moshe Rabbeinu provided with them. He points out similarly that the Gemara credits Moshe Rabbeinu with the authorship of the book of Iyov, the classic work in Tanakh of dealing with the problem of evil and tragedy. And his suggestion was that these two spiritual weapons were given by Moshe to the Jewish people as a way of dealing with this fundamental struggle that was before them. And therefore, that is really the bridge of the title Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbos. It's interesting, the notes in Emes Liakov, in the collection of Rabbi Yaakov's Chidushim, of his teachings on the Torah, points out that this idea that Iyov was written to help the Jews in their struggles in Egypt with theodicy already appears in the work of Rav Azaria Derasi, the famous and perhaps notorious Italian writer of the 16th century, who already suggested that is the Talmud's intention when it says that Moshe was the author of the book of Iyov. While we may not live in slavery, we also have to struggle with the notion of why tragedy befalls us. Perhaps Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbos is a way of helping us as well to struggle with that notion and to keep the faith that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the end of the day, is just, and that there will be a resolution to these very, very painful problems that will eventually be presented to us, and that we can continue to live by the light of that faith.